You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The unseen. My name was Lyra, but in the city's shadowed underbelly I had no name. I was simply Omega. The word wasn't a designation, it was a brand. A mark of worthlessness etched into my soul by every dismissive glance from the Alphas who strode through the gleaming hospital corridors like they owned the very air. The scent of antiseptic was my perfume, the cold, unforgiving tile floors were my kingdom. I moved through the world as a ghost, my head down, my wolf cowering deep within me. Survival was a symphony of silence, of making myself smaller, of vanishing into the background. Tonight, the winter wind sliced through my threadbare coat like a blade of pure ice. Rent was due tomorrow. My cupboards held nothing but the echoes of hunger. The shortcut through the lower district alley was a risk, a gauntlet of shadows and whispered dangers, but the 3 coins it saved meant bread. It meant one more day. The howls began as I was halfway through the narrow passage. They were wrong, wild, unhinged. Not the disciplined chorus of a pack, but the chaotic screams of rogues. My blood turned to ice. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to save myself. And then I heard it, a whimper, not an animal, but a child. Pure, undiluted terror, so sharp it cut through the howling wind and my own pounding heart. "Please don't, I want my papa," the voice was tiny. Shattered, my feet stopped moving, my breath hitched. In that whisper, I didn't hear a stranger. I heard the ghost of myself, a scared little girl forgotten by the world, the one nobody came for. I peered around a grimy dumpster. 3 massive, mangy-looking wolves had a small girl cornered against a dead-end wall. She was a vision of gold and white in the filth, like a fallen star. Her dress was silk, her hair gleamed, she was everything I was not. "Look what wandered out of its gilded cage," one rogue snarled, his voice like grinding stones. The leader licked his jagged teeth. "The king will pay a fortune to have his precious little pup returned, or perhaps we find a different buyer, one who pays in darker currencies." No, the word was a fire in my frozen chest. Not this child, not this innocence. I was untrained, I was weak. I was an Omega from the slums with a broken pipe my only weapon. I was about to die, but for the first time in my miserable, invisible life I would die seen, get away from her. The shout tore from my throat, raw and fierce, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. All 3 rogues turned, their surprise melted into cruel amusement. "Dinner delivers itself," the leader chuckled. I didn't let him finish. With a cry that was part fear, part fury, I charged. The pipe connected with a sickening crack against a shoulder. He howled, but it was a wasp's sting to a bear. A fist slammed into my ribs. Agony bloomed, white-hot, stealing my breath. I stumbled, but I did not fall. I could not fall for her. The fight was a blur of pain and desperation. I was outmatched, outnumbered, a mouse snapping at wolves. A claw raked my arm, searing lines of fire. I tasted blood in my mouth. This was it. This was my pathetic end. Then the thunder came. Not from the sky, but from the alley mouth. Hoofbeats. Armored warriors on midnight steeds flooded the narrow space, their silver swords gleaming under a sliver of moonlight. "Stand down, by order of His Majesty, King Cashin, the royal guard." Salvation had arrived, but their captain's sword was pointed at my throat. "Explain yourself, Omega," he commanded, his eyes hard. "Why are you here with the princess?" "Princess," the word echoed in my ringing head. The little girl wasn't just rich, she was royal, the Alpha King's daughter. Before I could stammer a reply, a new presence filled the alley, swallowing all the air. He stepped from a carriage of impossible grandeur, and the world seemed to bend around him. King Cashin, he was power-given form, tall, broad-shouldered, with storm-gray eyes that saw everything. He moved with a predator's grace, but when his gaze found the little girl, the king vanished. Only a father remained. "Ilara," he breathed, sweeping her into his arms. "Are you hurt, my little star?" "Papa, the lady saved me. She fought the bad wolves." All that terrifying intensity shifted to me. I was crumpled on the filthy ground, bleeding, insignificant, yet his gaze held me pinned. You fought 3 rogues for a child you did not know. His voice was deep, laced with a disbelief that felt like judgment. She was scared, I whispered, the truth tumbling out. No one should be that scared alone. Something unreadable flickered in his stormy eyes. He studied me for a long, silent moment that stretched into eternity. "Captain," he said, his decision made, "bring her to the palace. Have her wounds tended by our best healers." The palace. The words were a spell, a sentence, a dream I'd never dared to have. As the royal carriage carried me away from everything I'd ever known, I pressed my face to the cold glass. I watched my old life, the hunger, the fear, the invisibility, disappear into the night. I had no idea I would never see it again. And I had no idea of the storm that followed me, or the ancient power stirring in my blood, awakened by a single act of defiant courage. Chapter 2, Gilded Cages. The royal palace didn't rise from the hill. It erupted from it. Towers of pale stone clawed at the dawn sky, and walls thicker than houses encircled gardens that shimmered with frost-kissed beauty. It was a fortress, a dream, a monument to a world I had only ever glimpsed through dirty windows. I, Lyra, who smelled of antiseptic and alleyways, was being carried through its golden gates. The healer's chambers were a quiet marvel of herbs and soft light. My wounds were treated with a magic that left no scars, only a strange, tender warmth. The maid who brought me a simple gray dress wouldn't meet my eyes. I was a stain on their pristine world, a question mark in human form. Captain Kale, the guard from the alley, fetched me when the sun was high. "The king requests your presence in the sun room," he said, his voice neutral, but his watchful eyes missed nothing. I followed him through corridors that echoed with a silence so deep it felt like a living thing. Portraits of severe alphas stared down, their painted eyes judging my every step. The sunroom was aptly named. Light poured through towering windows, painting everything in gold. King Cashin stood by a fireplace large enough to stable a horse, no longer in traveling leathers but in deep blue robes that spoke of quiet, absolute power. And there, holding his hand, was the little girl, Princess Alara. She broke away from her father and ran to me, a smile like sunrise on her face. "You came, I knew you would," her small arms wrapped around my waist, and a feeling so foreign it hurt lodged in my chest. When was the last time anyone had touched me with joy? "Alara," Cashin's voice was a gentle warning. "Let our guest breathe. Thank you for joining me, Lyra," he said, gesturing to a chair that looked more like a throne. I sat on its very edge, feeling the vast distance between the plush velvet and the hard floors I was used to. "I've looked into your situation," he began, his tone careful, measured. "Lyra, 23, unaffiliated Omega, no pack, no family, no listed lineage. You work 3 jobs for wages that wouldn't feed a palace dog." Each fact was a pebble dropped into a still pond, rippling with my shame. "You live in a building in the lower district that is scheduled for demolition. You have nothing." The heat in my cheeks was unbearable. "I get by, Your Majesty. Do you?" He leaned forward slightly, and the full force of his attention was a physical weight. A person with nothing to lose can be a dangerous thing, or a very brave one. Which are you? The accusation was a cold splash of water. "You think I staged the attack? It would be a compelling strategy. Gain the royal family's trust from the inside." His eyes were relentless. "Papa, no," Alara cried, clinging to my side. "Lyra is good, she protected me." "I know, little star," Cashin said, his voice softening for her before hardening again for me. "But I must be certain. The wolves who attacked my daughter were not random rogues, they were too organized. Someone is targeting my family, so I will ask you plainly, Lyra. Why did you risk your life for a child you did not know?" The room waited, the fire crackled. Alara's hopeful gaze was a brand on my soul. I looked at the king, at this man who held the fate of thousands in his hands, and I gave him the only truth I had. because once, a long time ago, I was a little girl in a dark place, screaming for help that never came. My voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the quiet room. I couldn't be the one who didn't come for her. Silence, profound and heavy. The calculation in Cashin's eyes shifted, dissolved, replaced by something warmer, more complex. He looked from his daughter's trusting face to mine and nodded once as if confirming something to himself. Someone wants my family dead, Lyra. They have infiltrated my city, attacked my heir. I need people around her I can trust. People whose loyalty isn't for sale or tied to political games. He stood, a decisive movement. I am offering you a position, not as a servant, as Alara's companion and personal guardian. You will live here, be trained, and your sole duty will be to keep her safe. The world tilted. Your Majesty, I'm an Omega from the slums. I can't even fight. You fought yesterday, he countered. With more heart than half my trained guards. You saw a threat and moved to meet it against all logic of self-preservation. That is what I need. He paused, his gaze intense. The court will object, they will hate it, they will hate you. The question is, will you accept? I looked at Alara, who was practically vibrating with hope. I looked at the sunlight on the perfect floor, a chance to matter. A chance to protect, a chance to never be invisible again. My throat was tight. Yes, I breathed. Yes, I accept. Cashin's smile was small, but it reached his eyes. Good, Captain Kale will show you to your quarters. As I followed Kale out, I caught a glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror. The same hollow cheeks, the same tired eyes, but something new flickered there, a spark, a defiance. I didn't see the woman watching from a shadowed alcove, Lady Seraphine, the king's elegant, sharp-faced cousin. Her beautiful face was a mask of cold fury. Her plan to become the princess's regent, to steer the kingdom through the child, was crumbling before this upstart Omega. Her fingers tightened on the marble column until her knuckles turned white. This would not stand. This gutter rat would learn that some heights were never meant for her kind. She would learn the hard way, or she would not learn at all. Chapter 3. Whispers in the walls. My new quarters were larger than my entire old apartment. A bed with curtains, a window overlooking a quiet courtyard, a bathing room with endless hot water. It was a fantasy. But fantasies, I quickly learned, have teeth. The next morning, I was reading to Alara in her sunlit playroom when the door opened without a knock. A woman glided in, the scent of expensive perfume preceding her like a warning. She was exquisite, tall, silver blonde hair coiled in an intricate braid, her gown a cascade of emerald silk. "Oh," she said, her voice a melody of false surprise. I hadn't realized we were allowing the help to handle royal children now. I stood, my skin prickling. "I am Lyra, my lady, the princess's companion." Companion. She tasted the word like it was sour. How quaint. I am Lady Seraphine, the king's cousin. Her eyes, the cold green of winter moss, swept over me. "And what are your qualifications, Lyra, beyond a fortunate coincidence in a dirty alley?" Alara stepped closer to me. "Lyra saved me, Aunt Seraphine. She's very brave." "Bravery is one thing, darling," Seraphine purred, circling us like a sleek cat. "Wisdom is another. One must know one's place, and some places are simply not for certain people to occupy." Her smile was a blade. "Enjoy your elevation while it lasts." She left, the swish of her skirts the only sound in the suddenly cold room. The threat was clear, elegant, and absolute. The attacks were subtle, relentless. The seamstress accidentally pricked me with pins. My meals arrived cold or not at all. A servant gave me wrong directions, leading me to the royal archives where a scowling scholar chased me out as a thief of knowledge. The worst was Master Thuron, Alara's ancient, sour-faced tutor. "The princess's mind requires cultivation," he sneered one afternoon, "not contamination by uneducated influences." "Perhaps you should wait outside." "Lyra is smart," Alara protested. "She knows all sorts of things." "Does she?" Thuron's eyebrow arched. "Very well. What is the capital of the Eastern Reach, girl?" "Silverfall," I said quietly. Founded in 812 after the Great River Migration, though the original settlement was called Alder's Watch. Thuron blinked, and the treaty that ended the Borderland Wars, the Treaty of Whispering Stone, signed under a blood moon, which is why the seal is crimson wax. Its most contentious clause was Article 7, regarding pack hunting rights. The old tutor stared, his mouth slightly agape. The other tutors in the room had stopped to listen. "The lower district library has many books, Master Thuron," I said simply. "When you have nothing, knowledge is the only thing you can own." From that day, his disdain turned to a wary, simmering resentment. I had proven I wasn't an ignorant animal. I was something worse, a clever one. The true test came that evening. As I walked Alara to the family dining hall, Seraphine appeared with two other noblewomen blocking the corridor, a wall of silk and smugness. "Our little guardian," Seraphine smiled. "Still here, how resilient." Like a weed, one of her companions, a sharp-faced woman named Lady Drusilla, sniffed. "Persistent and out of place. The lower district must miss its scent," added the third, a willowy blonde named Lady Coraline, wrinkling her nose. Alara pushed in front of me. "You're being mean. Lyra smells like the garden after rain. Children are so sweetly blind," Seraphine sighed. "But blood tells, doesn't it, Miss Lyra? And your blood, what does it tell?" The insult hit its mark, my lack of lineage, my namelessness. It was my deepest wound, and they all knew it. "Excuse us," I said, trying to steer Alara past. "The princess needs her dinner." "Of course she does," Lady Drusilla said, her emphasis ugly, "and I'm sure you know all about hunger." They were calling me a gold digger, a parasite. My face burned. A new voice, calm as a frozen lake, cut through the tension. "Ladies." King Cashin stood at the corridor's end. The three women instantly curtsied, their masks of civility snapping back into place. "Your Majesty, we were just welcoming Miss Lyra to court life," Seraphine said, her voice dripping honey. "How thoughtful." Cashin's tone was pleasant, but a dangerous chill lay beneath it. "I trust you're teaching her the meaning of true hospitality." "Of course, Your Majesty, we live to serve." "I'm glad to hear it." He moved closer, and the very air grew colder. "Because I would hate to think anyone in my home was making my daughter's protector feel unwelcome." The threat was unspoken but absolute. These women had noble blood, but Cashin was the Alpha King. He was the storm that could wash them all away. "Papa." Alara broke free and ran to him. "Can Lyra eat with us tonight?" "Of course, little star," he said, his eyes never leaving the three noblewomen. "I was hoping she would. Miss Lyra, would you join us? I find conversation is much improved with brave and intelligent company." The dismissal was clear. The women scattered like leaves in a gale. As we walked to the dining hall, Cashin spoke quietly to me. "I apologize for their behavior. Seraphine has ambitions. They think I don't belong here," I whispered. "Do you think you belong here?" He asked, the question profound and terrifying. I looked at Alara skipping ahead, at the majesty around me, at the king walking beside me. "I want to protect her," I said finally. "The rest I don't know yet. Then we'll discover it together," he said, his voice softer. "You saved my daughter's life, Lyra. That earns you a place anywhere you choose to stand." Later, in the mirror of my room, I studied my reflection. The same face, but the eyes were changing. They were no longer just the eyes of someone who survived. They were becoming the eyes of someone who might, just might, dare to fight for her place. I didn't know it then, but the true battle hadn't even begun. And in the deepest vaults of the palace, something ancient, tied to my nameless blood, had begun to stir in its sleep, awakened by the first sparks of my defiance. Chapter 4, A Poison Petal. The first true test came disguised as kindness. It was a bright Tuesday morning. Alara and I were practicing her letters in her sitting room when a young kitchen maid, her hands trembling slightly, brought in a silver tray. Upon it sat a single, perfect crystal glass of ruby-red juice and a small plate of honey cakes, dusted with sugar that glittered like crushed diamonds. "From the kitchens, Your Highness," the maid, named Flora, said with a brittle smile. "Cook thought you might enjoy a special treat." Ilara clapped her hands. Strawberry nectar, my favorite, but something itched at my senses. The portion was too precise, just one glass, just two cakes. The maid's scent carried the sharp, sour tang of fear beneath the floral soap. My wolf, usually a silent prisoner within me, let out a low, uneasy growl. "Wait, Ilara," I said, stepping between her and the tray. "Flora, did cook say this was only for the princess?" The maid's eyes widened. What do you mean, miss?" "Usually when cook sends treats, she sends enough for everyone in the room," I said, keeping my voice light while my heart began to hammer. "This looks measured." Flora's face went as pale as the sugar. "I just bring what I'm told, miss." "Of course," I murmured. I picked up the glass, holding it to the light. The nectar was a beautiful, deep red, but there, at the very edge of the liquid, clinging to the crystal, was the faintest oily sheen. And the scent, beneath the overwhelming sweetness of strawberry, there was a whisper of something bitter. Almonds. My blood turned to ice. Nightshade extract. The knowledge rose from nowhere, a ghost memory from a book I'd read years ago in the dusty library. A poison that stopped the heart. Tasteless, odorless, unless you knew exactly what to look for. "They look delicious," I said, my voice eerily calm. "In fact, I think I'll try one first." "No," Flora lunged, knocking the glass from my hand. It shattered against the marble floor, and the room filled with the unmistakable, acrid scent of bitter almonds. "Guards," I shouted, shoving Ilara behind me. "Guards to the princess's chambers." Flora didn't run. She sank to her knees, sobbing. "They have my brother. They said they'd drown him in the river if I did." Captain Kale and his men were there in seconds, swords drawn. The room became a storm of armored bodies and shouted orders. Master Healer Alistair was summoned, his face grim as he examined the spilled liquid. "Nightshade," he confirmed, his voice hollow, concentrated. A single sip would have been fatal in minutes. King Cashin arrived not as a man, but as a force of nature. His usual composure was a cracked shell, and beneath it roared a fury so vast it chilled the air. He swept Ilara into his arms, holding her so tightly I thought he might never let go. "Who?" The single word was a crack of thunder. Flora, broken and trembling, confessed between ragged sobs. Gold coins pressed into her palm, threats against her family. Notes delivered by a hooded figure who knew secrets only her family should know. She didn't know who they were, she was just a pawn. "The Shadow Fang," Kale concluded, his expression bleak. "They're mercenaries, killers for hire from the wild lands. They have the resources, the ruthlessness." "Papa." Ilara whispered, her small voice muffled against his chest. "Is someone trying to hurt me?" Cashin's face, when he looked at his daughter, was tender, but when his gaze lifted to meet mine, the storm returned. "Some people are little star, but that is why we have guards. And healers," his eyes held mine, "and friends who notice when things are not as they seem." The weight of that statement settled on the room. If I hadn't been suspicious, if I hadn't tested the drink, Ilara would be dead. The heir to the throne, murdered by a poisoned treat in her own home. "Miss Lyra," Cashin said, his focus entirely on me. "How did you know?" I swallowed, my mouth dry. "I didn't know, not for certain." Flora was nervous, the portion was wrong. "In the lower district, you learn that sometimes kindness is the sharpest knife. You learn to trust the feeling in your gut when it screams that something is wrong." "Your instincts," he said slowly, "saved my daughter's life." Again, heat flooded my cheeks. "I was just being careful." Careful. He took a step closer, close enough that I could smell his scent, cedarwood and crisp autumn air, and it made something deep inside me tremble. "In 1 week, you have fought off 3 rogues and detected a poison that passed by everyone else." "That is not careful, Lyra. That is extraordinary." "I'm not extraordinary," I whispered, overwhelmed by his proximity, his intensity. "I'm just someone who has had to pay attention to survive." "And what," he asked, his voice dropping, for my ears alone, "have you been paying attention to since you arrived?" The question was a trapdoor into dangerous depths. Around us, the investigation continued, but in this small space between us, the world had narrowed to his storm-gray eyes. That the greatest threats don't always come from outside the walls, I said carefully. That enemies wear friendly faces, that Alara needs protection from more than just monsters in dark alleys. Exactly. His voice was low, urgent. Which is why I need someone whose loyalty is not for sale, someone I can trust completely. Before I could even process his words, Lady Seraphine appeared in the doorway, her perfect composure slightly frayed at the edges. "Your Majesty," I came as soon as I heard. "Is the princess safe?" "She is," Cashin said, not turning, his eyes still on me, "thanks to Miss Lyra's quick thinking." "How fortunate," Seraphine said, her smile tight, though one must wonder how an Omega from the slums knows so much about rare poisons. The implication landed like a stone in the quiet room. Several guards' hands drifted toward their weapons. "Lady Seraphine," Cashin's voice was winter itself, "are you suggesting Miss Lyra was involved in this plot?" "Of course not, Your Majesty." Her laugh was too bright. "I simply marvel at her specialized knowledge." "Perhaps," Captain Kale interjected coldly, "Miss Lyra's survival instincts are simply better honed than those of us who have never had to question our next meal." Seraphine's face flushed with suppressed rage, but before she could retort, Alara spoke. Her small voice carried a shocking authority. "Lady Seraphine, Lyra saved my life. If you can't say nice things, maybe you should be quiet." The rebuke from a child was a masterpiece. Seraphine's mask shattered for a single, glorious second, revealing pure, undiluted hatred beneath. Then it was back, smooth as glass. "Of course, Your Highness, forgive me." She curtsied deeply, but her eyes promised a vengeance that would be slow and cold. As she left, Cashin watched her go, his expression unreadable. "Kale, I want a full investigation. Everyone with access to the kitchens, everyone who knew Alara's schedule, and," his gaze returned to me, "increase security around Miss Lyra as well. If the Shadow Fang see her as an obstacle, she is now a target." The word target sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I had gone from invisible to bullseye in a matter of days. "Your Majesty, I don't need." "You do," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You've made powerful enemies simply by doing your duty. By protecting my child, that makes you family, Lyra, whether you realize it or not." Family, the word was a key, turning in a lock I didn't know I possessed. It left me breathless. That night, as guards took up posts outside my door and Alara slept safely in the royal chambers, I stood at my window. The moonlit gardens were peaceful, beautiful. A lie. A soft knock at my door broke the silence. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. But on the floor lay a single, folded piece of parchment. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The message was brief, written in an elegant, unfamiliar hand. "The truth sleeps in the Garden of Echoes. Come at midnight, come alone. Your past is not what you believe." And below that, 4 words that made my heart stop. Chapter 5. The Garden of Echoes. Midnight in the royal gardens was a world of silver and shadow. The manicured hedges of the sunlit hours transformed into a labyrinth of lurking shapes, and the sweet perfume of roses carried a chilling, metallic edge on the cold air. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep, every sigh of the wind felt like a whisper against my neck. The note burned against my skin, tucked into my sleeve. "Your mother's blood remembers." It was a madness to come alone, a trap most likely, but those words, they were a hook in my soul. I had no memories of a mother. Only the official story, orphaned by rogues, no records, no name. The Garden of Echoes was the oldest part of the grounds, a circular space surrounded by high, curved walls of pale stone. In its center stood a crumbling fountain, a stone woman holding an empty urn, her face worn smooth by centuries of rain. It was said whispers spoken here would travel the walls, returning to the speaker as faint echoes. I saw her as I entered. A figure cloaked in gray, standing by the dry basin. She turned as I approached, and moonlight caught her face. She was older, perhaps 60, with hair the color of tarnished silver and eyes the precise, haunting gray of a winter sea. There was a tired nobility in her posture, a grace that had known grief. "You came," she said. Her voice was low, cultured, and carried the weight of years. "I was not certain you would be brave enough. Who are you?" My own voice sounded small in the vast, silent space. "My name is Isolde," she said, "and 23 years ago I held you in my arms as your mother drew her last breath. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet." I stumbled back, my hand finding the cold edge of the fountain for support. "That's impossible. My parents died in a rogue attack. There's no record. There is no record because the records were purged," Isolde said, her words sharp and precise. "Your parents did not die by rogue fangs. They were murdered, hunted, by order of the previous Alpha King, Cashin's own father." The world fractured. "Why?" Isolde moved closer, her stormy eyes holding mine with an intensity that brooked no disbelief. "Because your mother, Ilara, yes, the princess bears her name, was the last daughter of the Sentinel line. For 1,000 years our people served the royal house, not as servants but as partners, as protectors. We were born with gifts, heightened intuition, a bond to the land, the ability to sense malice before it strikes. We were the kingdom's silent guardians." She paused, the memory etching lines of pain on her face. "But King Roland, Cashin's father, grew to fear our power. He saw not partnership, but a rival claim to the throne. He believed the Sentinels would one day seek to rule, so he gave the order, the purge of the Sentinels. In one bloody night, every man, woman, and child of our bloodline that could be found was slaughtered." A sob I didn't know I was holding broke from my throat. My mother, she was young, hidden, she thought the southern provinces were safe. Isolde's voice cracked. "They found her just after you were born. She had minutes. Just minutes to hide you, to cast the last of her strength into a concealing spell to make you seem ordinary. A nameless omega with no spark, no scent of power. She died so you could live in plain sight." She reached into her cloak and withdrew a small, worn leather journal. She pressed it into my hands. It was warm, as if alive. This was hers. She wrote in it as they closed in, instructions, warnings, and the truth. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was elegant, hurried, stained in one corner with a rust-colored blot that could only be one thing. "My dearest child, if you read this, I am gone, but you must know, you are Lyra of the Sentinel line. Our power sleeps in your blood, waiting for the moment you choose to protect not just yourself but others. It will wake when you need it most. Trust your instincts, they are your birthright. Remember, we were never servants, we were the shield in the shadows." The words blurred through my tears. "The alley saving Ilara, you chose to protect a royal child," Isolde whispered. "That choice, that selfless act began to unravel the spell. Your true nature is awakening. That is how you sense the poison. That is how you fought with a strength you should not possess. Why tell me now?" I choked out. "Because the ones who killed your mother are moving again," she said, her face grim. "They know a sentinel survived. They know what you are. The shadow fang work for them. The poison was just the beginning. They will not stop until every last drop of sentinel blood is erased from this earth." The weight of it was crushing. A legacy of protectors, a birthright of death. What do I do? "You have a choice," Isolde said, gripping my shoulders. "You can continue to hide, to be the invisible Omega and hope they never find you, or you can embrace what you are, become the shield, become Cashin's sentinel." His sentinel, the phrase was intimate, terrifying. "The bond between our line and theirs is ancient, written in soul-deep magic. That is why you risked everything for his daughter. That is why he cannot look away from you. His wolf recognizes what you are, even if his mind does not yet understand." Before I could process this, the sound of booted feet echoed through the garden. Torchlight flickered between the hedges. "Lyra," Captain Kale's voice, urgent, cut through the night. "Lyra, where are you?" Isolde pressed something cold and smooth into my palm, a pendant on a silver chain. A simple, polished stone the color of a stormy sky wrapped in delicate silver filigree. "Your mother S. It will help focus your power when the time comes. Trust Cashin, child. His heart will guide him true. When will I see you again?" When you are ready to claim your full heritage, she whispered, stepping back into the deeper shadows of the curved wall. But know this, your enemies are not just outside the walls, they are within. They wear crowns of courtesy and smiles of silk. Choose your allies with care. By the time Kale and his guards reached the fountain, their torches painting the stone woman in dancing light, I stood alone. The journal and pendant were hidden beneath my clothes, burning against my skin like twin brands of truth. Miss Lyra, Kale's face was tight with concern. You cannot be out here alone, it's not safe. I couldn't sleep, I murmured, the half-truth tasting like ash. The garden seemed quiet. Quiet is where danger grows, he said firmly. Come, I'll escort you back. As we walked, my mind reeled, sentinel, guardian, hunted. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. I wasn't nobody. I was the last of a line of somebodies who were murdered for what they were. And the man I was sworn to protect, the king whose presence made my soul ache with a strange, longing recognition, his father had ordered my family's destruction. The walls of the palace, once a symbol of safety, now felt like a gilded cage. And in the darkness, new eyes were watching, not just the shadow Fang, but others closer who sensed the change in me, who feared the awakening of a power that could shatter their carefully laid plans. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. And I was no longer a pawn. I was a piece with a power I didn't yet understand, moving on a board drenched in my family's blood. Chapter 6, The Festival of Masks. The Grand Masquerade was the palace's most dazzling event. The great ballroom was a constellation of 1,000 candles, their light caught and fractured by crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls. Nobles spun in a kaleidoscope of silk and velvet, their identities hidden behind elaborate masks of feathers, gold, and jewels. Laughter and music swirled on air thick with perfume and intrigue. I felt like a fraud in my own skin. The gown, a deep emerald green, was a gift from the king himself. It fit perfectly, whispering of a grace I never possessed. My mask was simple silver, shaped like a crescent moon. I kept close to Alara, a tiny, sparkling figure in silver and white, her mask dotted with chips of diamond that made her look like she'd captured starlight. Remember, stay close, I murmured to her, my eyes scanning the crowd. Since the night in the garden, every smiling mask looked like a threat. My sentinel senses, a term I was still learning to accept, hummed just beneath my skin, a tuning fork resonating with hidden tensions. I promise, Alara said, but her eyes were wide with wonder at the spectacle. The first whisper of wrongness came as a faint, acrid scent cutting through the floral perfumes. Smoke, but not wood smoke, this was chemical, sharp. Then I felt it, a spike of pure, undiluted malice cutting through the merriment like a shard of ice. It came from near the orchestra, a group of figures whose masks seemed more like helmets, whose graceful movements held a predatory tension. My hand flew to the communication crystal nestled at my throat. Cashin, I whispered, the name feeling foreign and urgent on my lips. They're here. His voice crackled back, low and immediate. Where? 3 groups, servants, entrance, wine cellar stairs, and I closed my eyes, letting the strange new sense expand. It was like hearing a song only I could hear, a discordant symphony of ill intent. The main gardens, they're surrounding the ballroom. Before he could respond, the music faltered. A scream, raw and real, tore through the waltz from the servants' corridor. For a heartbeat, the dancing continued, the revelers thinking it part of some theatrical display. Then the doors to the gardens burst open not with servants, but with a flood of armed, black-clad figures, and the doors from the cellars exploded upward in a shower of splintered wood and stone. Chaos, hungry and immediate, devoured the elegance. Luna. I screamed, using the pet name without thought, grabbing her hand, but the surge of panicked nobles tore her from my grip. I saw her silver dress vanish into the thrashing crowd. Luna. Cashin's roar of pure alpha fury cut through the screams, but even he was trapped by the tidal wave of bodies. My sentinel power surged not as strength but as clarity. Time seemed to slow. I could see the patterns. The attackers weren't just killing randomly. They were hurting, cutting off exits, creating pockets of slaughter, and their ultimate target was clear. A phalanx of them was carving a ruthless path toward where Alara had been standing. I didn't think, I moved. Ducking under a swinging blade, slipping between two panicked courtiers, I became a ghost in the emerald gown, flowing against the current of fear. I reached the center of the ballroom just as 3 attackers closed in on a small, trembling form pressed against a marble column. Alara. Get away from her, the command tore from me, ringing with an authority that wasn't my own. It held the echo of ancient stone and unwavering duty. The lead assassin turned. His mask was a plain, polished black wood. The sentinel whelp, he hissed, his voice distorted. A bonus prize, he lunged. I had no weapon, but I had instinct. I sidestepped, grabbed the heavy velvet drape of a nearby banner and yanked. The brass pole it hung from came loose and I swung it like a staff. It connected with his knee with a sickening crack. He went down with a cry. The second came at me with a short, cruel knife. I could see his movement before he made it, a premonition painted in my mind. I dropped low, his blade passing over my head, and drove my shoulder into his gut. He staggered back, gasping, but the third was already behind Alara, his hand clamping over her mouth, a blade at her throat. His eyes above the mask were cold, empty, professional. Drop the pole, sentinel, or the pup dies. Time stopped. The screams, the clashing steel, the roar of the king fighting his way toward us all faded to a distant hum. There was only the blade against Alara's throat, her terrified eyes locked on mine, and the cold, certain knowledge in the assassin's gaze. The pendant at my neck, my mother's stone, grew warm, then hot. A silent scream built in my blood, protect. The word wasn't heard, it was known. It was the first law of my blood. A pulse of raw, unseen energy exploded from me. It wasn't light or sound, it was force. A wave of pure, focused will that screamed harm not this child. The assassin's knife didn't just drop. It flew from his hand as if yanked by a wire, clattering across the marble. He stumbled back, clutching his head, a guttural cry of pain and confusion tearing from his throat. The magical compulsion that drove him, the one I could now see as a dark, oily cord around his mind, snapped like rotten thread. He looked at his hands, at Alara, at me, his eyes wide with horror. What did you make me do? In that moment of his stunned clarity, Cashin was there. His sword was a blur of silver and the assassin fell, a threat eliminated. The king didn't pause. He swept Alara into one arm, his other grabbing my wrist, his grip iron strong. To the upper gallery now. We ran, Kale and a wedge of guards forming a living shield around us. Behind us, the battle raged, but the heart of it, the target, was moving. As we reached the relative safety of the gallery overlooking the carnage, Cashin set Alara down, checking her frantically for wounds. Then he turned to me, his mask was gone. His face was splattered with someone else's blood, his hair disheveled, his chest heaving. But his eyes were not on the battle below, they were on me. They held a storm of emotions, fury, relief, and a dawning, earth-shattering awe. What, he breathed, the word barely audible over the din, was that? I looked at my own hands, still trembling. I don't know. You shattered a shadow fang binding from 20 feet away, Kale said, staring at me as if I'd grown wings. That's not possible. Sentinel magic, a new, weary voice said. Isolde emerged from a shadowed doorway, her simple gray dress stark against the ballroom's carnage. She looked at Cashin, her gaze steady and sad. Your Majesty, the power your father tried to exterminate, it stands before you. It just saved your daughter's life. Again, Cashin's gaze swung from Isolde to me, the pieces crashing together in his mind. The uncanny intuition, the poison, the impossible defense. His father's greatest sin, given flesh and standing in an emerald gown, the betrayal in his eyes wasn't for me. It was for the legacy he'd inherited. My father, he began, his voice thick, was a fearful man who committed a terrible crime, Isolde finished gently. But the past is a ghost. Lyra is the living promise, your shield if you have the wisdom to accept her. Below, the guards were gaining control. The attackers were being subdued or killed, but the victory felt hollow, cold. Cassian stepped closer to me, ignoring the blood, the chaos, the watching eyes of his captain, and the mysterious sentinel elder. He looked at me not as a king to a subject, not as an alpha to an omega, but as one soul recognizing its mirror. "All this time," he whispered, for me alone, "the way I felt drawn to you, my wolf knew, it knew what you were." "And what am I?" I asked, the question hanging between us, fragile as glass. Before he could answer, a guard rushed up, his face ashen. "Your Majesty, we've captured their commander. He's talking. He says this was a diversion." Cassian's head snapped up. A diversion for what? The guards swallowed. For the main force. They're not attacking the palace, they're marching on the lower district. They mean to burn it to the ground, to destroy the place they believe their sentinel traitor crawled from. The blood drained from my face, my home. The crumbling buildings, the hungry families, the invisible people, they were going to burn it all to erase me. Cassian's expression hardened into something terrible and majestic. He was no longer just a father or a king confronted by his past. He was the storm made manifest. "Kale," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "mobilize the entire royal guard. We ride for the lower district. Now." His eyes found mine, holding a promise and a command. "You will show them, Lyra of the Sentinel line, what it means to threaten those under our protection." The shield had been recognized. Now it was time to go to war. Chapter 7, The Shield and the Sword. We rode through the sleeping city like a river of steel and fury. Cassian at the forefront on a massive black warhorse, his crown forgotten, his face a mask of grim purpose. I rode beside him on a swift gray mare, Isolde's pendant a cold, comforting weight against my skin, the Sentinel journal a hidden fire in my saddlebag. Behind us thundered 100 of the king's guard, their armor gleaming under the guttering torchlight of the city's upper tiers. The journey downward was a descent through layers of reality. The clean, wide avenues gave way to narrowing, crooked streets. The scent of perfume and baked goods soured into the smells of stagnant water, cheap ale, and despair. This was my world, the world that had shaped me, that had tried to break me, and now, because of me, it was a target. We heard the chaos before we saw it, not the clash of battle, but the terrible symphony of destruction, screams, the crackle of fire, the crash of collapsing wood. The orange glow of flames painted the underbelly of the night sky a sickly, hellish hue. We rounded the final corner into the heart of the lower district, and my heart shattered. The main square, where the market thrived by day, where old men played chess on crates, where hungry children chased stolen apples, was an inferno. Black-clad shadow fang mercenaries moved with systematic brutality, herding terrified families from their burning homes, not to spare them but to execute them in the open. They weren't just destroying a place, they were erasing a people. My people. At the center of the nightmare stood their commander. He was taller than the others, his armor edged in tarnished silver. He wore no helmet, revealing a face scarred by old violence and cold, intelligent eyes. He held no weapon. He simply directed the slaughter with calm, chilling gestures. Cassian didn't give an order. He raised his sword, a single, sweeping arc of light, and let out a roar that was pure primal alpha. It shook the very air, a challenge and a declaration of war. The battle exploded into being. Our guards charged into the fray, a tide of disciplined silver against the chaotic black, but the Shadow Fang were ready. They fought with the feral desperation of cornered animals, their numbers greater than we'd anticipated. Cassian was a force of nature. His sword moved like lightning, a beautiful, deadly dance that left a trail of fallen enemies. But for everyone he cut down, 2 more seemed to appear from the smoke. I slid from my horse, my legs trembling. This wasn't a ballroom. This was a butcher's yard. The screams were not of nobles, but of mothers, of shopkeepers, of the old and the frail. The heat from the burning tenement where I'd lived for a year seared my face. A mercenary lunged at an old woman trying to drag a sobbing child from a doorway. I didn't think, I ran. I had no weapon, no training, but I had rage, a deep sentinel rage for the defenseless. I threw myself at him, knocking him off balance. We fell in a tangle of limbs. He was stronger, heavier. He backhanded me, my vision exploding in stars. I tasted blood, sentinel filth, he grunted, raising a dagger. This is for you. Then a new sensation flooded me, not fear, not anger, a profound, vibrating connection. I could feel the cobblestones beneath me, the roots of the burning buildings, the terror of the people, the malice of the attackers. It was a map of pain painted directly onto my soul. My mother's pendant burned like a star against my chest. I didn't push him away. I placed my palm flat against the cobblestone street, and I willed. The stone beneath his kneeling leg didn't just shift, it reared. A spike of ancient granite, sharp as a spear, erupted from the ground, catching him in the thigh. He screamed, tumbling aside, his attack forgotten. I stared, breathless, at the stone's spike. It shimmered with a faint, silver light before crumbling back into dust. The earth had answered me. "Lyra!" Cashin's shout cut through my shock. He was 20 yards away, surrounded by 4 mercenaries, fighting like a demon but being slowly driven back toward a raging fire. And I saw the commander. He had seen the stone spike. He had seen me. A cruel, calculating smile touched his lips. He pointed at Cashin and barked an order to a group of archers perched on a half-collapsed roof. They knocked arrows not of wood but of dark iron, doom-tipped. Time crystallized, the sounds of battle faded. There was only the king, the archers, and the absolute, unshakable law in my blood: protect the king. I ran, not around the fighting, but through it. A blade grazed my arm. I didn't feel it. I was a streak of emerald and desperation, the world narrowing to the space between Cashin and those arrows. I reached him just as the archers loosed. A volley of black shafts hissed through the smoky air. I didn't try to shove him. I stepped in front of him, my back to the arrows, my arms spread wide. I looked up into his storm-gray eyes, wide with shock and denial. No, the roar was ripped from him. I closed my eyes and reached for that deep, thrumming connection to the earth, to the stone of the buildings, to the very air. I didn't form a wall, I formed a concept. A dome of negation, a space where harm could not enter. The arrows struck. But they did not strike us. They hit an invisible barrier an inch from my back, a shimmering, silver-veined dome of force that rippled like water where each arrow impacted. The iron points didn't pierce. They stopped, hung in the air for an impossible second, and then disintegrated into black ash that fell like foul snow. Silence fell in our immediate circle. The mercenaries facing Cashin stumbled back, their faces masks of superstitious terror. "Witchcraft," one hissed. Cashin stared at the ash on the ground, then at me. His face was pale beneath the grime and blood. He had seen magic in his life, but nothing like this. Nothing so instinctive, so absolute, so sacrificial. The commander's smile vanished. His cold eyes fixed on me with a new, intense hatred. The sentinel lives, and she has awakened. He raised his voice, a magical amplification making it echo over the square. "Kill the girl, the king is nothing without his shield." Every Shadow Fang warrior still standing turned their weapons toward me. The focus of the entire battle shifted. I was no longer a bystander, I was the primary target. Cashin moved instantly, placing his own body between me and the onslaught, his sword a relentless whirlwind. "Kale to the sentinel." But we were overwhelmed. The sheer press of bodies, all aimed at me, was a tidal wave. I could feel my strange, newborn power flickering, drained by the effort of the shield. I couldn't do it again. We were driven back, step by step, toward the raging inferno of a grain warehouse. The heat was blistering. The smoke choked. This was it, not a grand hall, but a filthy square, burning to death beside the man I was sworn to protect. Cashin's back pressed against mine. "I'm sorry, Lyra," he gasped, his voice raw with smoke and regret. "I led you here." "No," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. The pendant was ice cold now, its energy spent. "This is where I was always meant to be, at your side." He turned his head just for a second, our eyes meeting in the hellish glow. In that look there was no king, no sentinel, no past or future. There was only a profound, unspoken understanding, a recognition. Then a new sound cut through the roar of fire and clashing steel. A horn, not the clear note of the royal guard, but a deeper, older, mournful bellow. From every alley, every shadow, figures emerged. Not soldiers. They were men and women in simple, worn clothes, smiths with hammers, butchers with cleavers, old veterans with rusted swords, mothers with iron pokers. The people of the lower district, the invisible people, they did not charge with a roar. They advanced with a silent, terrifying resolve. They fell upon the shadow fang from the flanks and rear, fighting not with skill, but with the furious, pent-up strength of a lifetime of being trampled. They fought for their homes, and I realized with a painful jolt they were fighting for me, one of their own who had stood with the king. The tide turned. The mercenaries, disciplined against soldiers, were unprepared for the raw, chaotic fury of a people with nothing left to lose. In the confusion, I saw the commander. He saw his plan crumbling. His cold eyes met mine across the square. He raised a hand, not in command, but in a mocking, farewell salute. Then he melted back into the smoke, escaping the chaos he had created. The battle ended not with a climactic clash, but with a slow, bloody unwinding. The last shadow fang were subdued or fled. The fires were attacked with bucket chains formed by guards and citizens alike. Cashin stood amidst the smoldering ruins, his arm around my shoulders, holding me upright as much as supporting himself. We were both filthy, bleeding, exhausted. Before us, the people of the lower district knelt, not just to their king, but to the pair of us. He looked at them, then down at me, his expression one of awe and devastation. "They came for you," he whispered. "They came for us," I corrected, my voice hoarse. In the ashes of my old world, something new had been forged. Not just a bond between a king and his sentinel, but a bond between a crown and its people. And I, Lyra the Invisible, stood at the heart of it, my secret blood now the kingdom's worst-kept, most dangerous hope. The shield had been tested in fire. And it had held. Chapter 8, The Council of Knives. The victory in the lower district was ash in our mouths. We had saved lives, but the district lay in smoldering ruins, a testament to how close the enemy had come. My awakening sentinel power was no longer a secret whispered in gardens. It was a beacon that had shone in a city square, seen by hundreds, and the enemy commander had escaped. Back in the palace, in a secure council chamber deep below the earth, the air was thick with tension that had nothing to do with battle fatigue. Around the ancient stone table sat the royal council, the 5 most powerful dukes and duchesses of the realm. Duke Orin from the mountainous north, with a beard like storm clouds and eyes like chips of flint. Duchess Lenore of the fertile east, her beauty sharp and calculating. Lord Thuron, the scholarly master of archives, looking more pinched than usual. Lady Seraphine, of course, a vision of composed malice in lavender silk, and Cashin at the head with me standing slightly behind his chair, a living, breathing anomaly. "This display in the slums changes nothing," Duke Orin began, his voice a low rumble. "The girl is a risk, an unstable element. Sentinel magic is wild magic, forbidden for a reason. It saved your king's life, uncle," Cashin said, his tone dangerously calm. "It saved my daughter's life. It saved countless innocents last night. That seems a compelling reason to me. At what cost?" Duchess Lenore interjected, her fingers steepled. "You have brought a creature of legend into our midst and made her your shadow. The common people may cheer now, but the noble houses are terrified. They see their ancient privileges threatened by a power they cannot control or understand." "They should be terrified," I said softly. All eyes snapped to me. I hadn't meant to speak. The words just came. They should be terrified of the shadow fang who burned city districts, not of the one who stood against them. Seraphine's laugh was a delicate, poisonous thing. Such noble sentiment from one who lived in that filth. "Tell me, Sentinel, do you feel your power gives you the right to lecture your betters? Cashin's hand came down on the table, not with a slam, but with a quiet, final thud that silenced the room. She is not lecturing, she is stating a fact, and she has more right to be in this room than any who value their bloodline over the lives they are sworn to protect. A heavy silence followed. Lord Thuron cleared his throat. The historical precedent, Your Majesty, the Sentinels were disbanded, their line attainted for treason by your royal father. To restore one, even unofficially, is to call his judgment into question. It weakens the foundation of your own rule. There it was, the true heart of their fear. Not wild magic, not an upstart Omega, but the unraveling of a comfortable, brutal history. My father's judgment, Cashin said, each word measured and cold, was fear masquerading as wisdom. It was a crime that stained our house. I will not perpetuate it. He looked at each council member in turn. Lyra of the Sentinel line is under my protection. She is the protector of my heir. Her power is a gift to this kingdom, not a threat. This is not a debate. This is my will. The defiance in the room was a living thing choking the air. Duke Oren's face was purple. Duchess Lenore's smile was frozen. Seraphine simply watched, her green eyes glittering with a hate so pure it was almost admirable. Then, Your Majesty, Duke Oren said, rising, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, you must understand the consequences. The Northern Alliance cannot, in good conscience, support a throne that cavorts with forbidden magic and elevates gutter-born witches. Our treaties, our levies, our loyalty, they will need to be reconsidered. It was a threat of secession, of civil war. Before Cashin could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Captain Kale stood there, his face grave. Your Majesty, a messenger from the eastern border, urgent. A dusty, exhausted scout staggered in, falling to one knee. Your Majesty, Duke Malik of the Eastern Marches, he's dead, murdered in his sleep, and on his wall they painted a symbol. The scout's eyes flicked to me, full of terror, a silver shield shattered by a black wolf, the symbol of the Sentinel line defiled. The council erupted. You see, Duchess Lenore cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. Her very presence brings death, it's a curse. The Shadow Fang are cleaning house, Cashin said, his voice cutting through the panic. Eliminating any noble they suspect might have sympathized with the Sentinels, or who now might support their return. This is not her doing, it is the doing of those who fear what she represents. And they will keep killing, Duke Oren roared, until you give her to them. Or until her magic tears this kingdom apart. In the uproar I felt it, a subtle, slithering sensation against my new senses, not a threat from outside, a threat from within, a venomous intent focused not on Cashin this time but solely, squarely on me. It came from the council table. My eyes found Seraphine. She was not shouting. She was watching the chaos with a serene, almost bored expression, but beneath it, in the cold green depths of her eyes, I saw the truth. She wasn't afraid of the Shadow Fang. She was using them, the fear, the dissent, the murder, it was all fuel for her fire. Cashin stood, his authority radiating like heat. This council is adjourned. Kale, double the guards on all border nobles. Send envoys with warnings. We are at war whether the council acknowledges it or not. He turned to me, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. Lyra, with me. As we left the chamber, the weight of their hostile stares was a physical pressure on my back. In the quiet of the hallway, Cashin leaned against the cold stone wall, running a hand over his face. For a moment, the mighty king looked simply tired. They will try to force my hand, he said quietly. They will demand your exile or your execution. Then I should go, I whispered, the words tearing at my throat. I can draw the Shadow Fang away. I can, no. He pushed off the wall and stood before me. You are not a piece to be sacrificed, Lyra. You are the key. My father tried to break the shield, and it left us vulnerable for a generation. I will not make his mistake. He took my hand, his touch warm and sure. The council sees a weapon or a curse. I see a partner. The one this kingdom was always meant to have. His words, his touch, the unwavering faith in his eyes, it was too much. It filled the hollow places in me with a terrifying, beautiful light. I don't know how to be that, I confessed, my voice breaking. I can barely control this power. I could hurt someone, I could hurt you. You won't, he said with absolute certainty, because that is not who you are. Your power doesn't define you, Lyra, your heart does. And your heart, he lifted my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, a gesture so intimate it stole my breath. Your heart is the strongest thing I have ever known. In that moment, standing in the dim torchlight of the palace corridor, with a council of knives at our backs and an army of shadows at our gates, something irrevocable settled between us. It was a vow unspoken but absolute, a king and his sentinel, not master and servant. Not Alpha and Omega, but two halves of a single purpose standing together against the coming storm, and in the shadows, Seraphine watched us part, a slow, cruel smile touching her lips. The king's attachment was his weakness, and the sentinel's heart, that would be her ultimate vulnerability. The game was far from over, it had just become beautifully, terribly personal. Chapter 9, The Heart of Stone. The pressure was a vice tightening every day. The Northern Alliance formally suspended trade. Rumors slithered through the palace like serpents. The sentinel is a witch, the king is bespelled. The kingdom is cursed. Alara felt the tension, her bright laughter growing rare, her small hand seeking mine more often. She was my anchor, my reason. Cashin's solution was work, relentless, exhausting work, rebuilding the lower district, strengthening border defenses, and for me, training. Not with swords, which felt dead and clumsy in my hands, but with Isolde. We met at dawn in the oldest, most secluded corner of the gardens, where the hedges grew wild and the statues were worn featureless by time. Your power is not a blade to be swung, Isolde said, her voice as calm as the morning mist. It is a root, it is the awareness of the stone, the whisper of the water, the memory in the wind. You do not command it, you ask, you listen. It was maddeningly subtle. For days I felt nothing but frustration. I would press my hands to the earth and feel only dirt. I would try to sense malice and hear only my own racing heart. Then one morning, soaked by a cold drizzle, I sat before a moss-covered rock, despair a bitter taste in my mouth. I can't do this, I whispered to the empty air. I'm not her, I'm not a sentinel, I'm just Lyra, the girl who got lucky. The rock, for a fleeting second, felt warm, a gentle, reassuring warmth like a hand on a shoulder. A deep, silent hum resonated through the ground, not a sound but a feeling of immense, patient age, a feeling of waiting, tears mixed with the rain on my face. It wasn't a weapon, it was a presence. I had been trying to seize a ghost when all I needed to do was acknowledge it was there. That afternoon, everything changed. I was reading with Alara in the library when a wave of dizziness hit me, so strong I dropped the book. The world didn't spin, it screamed, a silent, psychic scream of pure, agonized betrayal that tore through my newfound senses. Lyra, Alara's voice was far away. Where is the king? I gasped, my head pounding. In the throne room, hearing petitions with Uncle Orin and Aunt Seraphine. No, the scream was coming from there, not from a person, from the stone of the throne room itself. From the ancient foundation stones that had witnessed 1,000 oaths. They were screaming of poison, not nightshade, something older, slower, more insidious, a poison for stone and soul. I ran, I didn't think of guards, of protocol, of the council's hatred. I flew through the corridors, a ghost in green, driven by a terror I didn't fully understand. I burst into the throne room. Cashin sat on the high dais, listening to a merchant's complaint. Duke Orin stood to his right, Seraphine to his left, the picture of loyal counsel. Sunlight streamed through high windows, gleaming on the marble floor. To everyone else, it was a normal day. To me, it was a scene from a nightmare. A sickly, invisible miasma seeped from the base of the king's throne itself, a creeping, magical rot. It coiled around the dais, touching Cashin's boots, leaching upward. It was a poison meant to weaken, to cloud the mind, to sow despair and paranoia over weeks. A poison that would make a king doubt his own sanity, his own allies, until he became a puppet or a corpse. And its source, my eyes traced the vile energy. It wasn't in a cup or a weapon. It was woven into the new mortar used to repair a small, almost invisible crack in the throne's base a week ago. The repair Seraphine had personally overseen, claiming it was a gesture of familial devotion. She stood there now, so beautiful, so composed, a faint, caring smile on her lips as she watched the poison do its work. Rage, clean and white-hot, incinerated my fear. This was not an attack from outside. This was a serpent in the bosom, striking at the very heart of the man who had shown me nothing but faith. I didn't shout. I walked forward, my steps echoing in the suddenly silent hall. All eyes turned to me, the merchantess, the guards, Duke Oren's furious glare, Cassion's puzzled frown. I walked past them all, straight to the base of the throne. I knelt, ignoring Seraphine's sharp intake of breath. "Lyra, what is the meaning of this?" Cassion's voice held concern, not anger. I placed my bare hands directly on the repaired section of stone. The physical mortar was cool, but beneath my palms the magical corruption squirmed like a nest of maggots, repulsive and violent. I closed my eyes. I didn't reach for power. I remembered the warm rock in the garden. The patient presence. I didn't scream at the stone to be pure. I whispered to it. I showed it a memory, the true, strong, unbroken stone it was meant to be. I offered it the feeling of sunlight, of stability, of purpose. I asked it to remember itself. A gasp went through the room. Where my hands touched, the gray mortar began to glow with a soft, silver light. The sickly miasma hissed, visible now as tendrils of black smoke that writhed and dissipated in the sunlight. A faint, foul odor like spoiled milk and grave dirt filled the air before vanishing. The silver glow faded. The mortar looked no different, but the screaming in my soul had stopped. The throne's foundation was quiet, whole, cleansed. I looked up, my hands still on the stone. Cassion was staring, his face pale. Duke Oren looked shocked. The guards had their hands on their swords but were frozen, unsure. Seraphine's composure was a cracked vase. Her smile was gone, her eyes wide with a shock so profound it stripped her mask bare. She hadn't just been discovered. She had witnessed the impossible. Her slow, subtle, undetectable poison had just been unmade by a touch. "What?" Duke Oren finally choked out. "What dark magic is this?" "The opposite of dark, uncle," Cassion said softly, his eyes never leaving me. He rose from the throne, and for the first time I saw it, a slight easing in his shoulders, a clarity returning to his gaze. The poison had already been working. "This is the magic of truth, of purification." His voice hardened, turning to Seraphine. "Cousin, you oversaw this repair." "Explain." All her elegance couldn't hide the frantic calculation in her eyes. I know nothing. This is a trick." She plants evidence with her witchcraft and now points the finger. "The poison was in the mortar, Seraphine," I said, my voice trembling with spent energy and fury. "A slow poison for the mind. You've been standing here watching it work on him every day, smiling." The accusation hung in the sunlit air, monstrous and undeniable. Seraphine's face contorted. The beautiful lady vanished, replaced by something vicious and cornered. "You gutter-born viper. You have poisoned his mind against his own blood. He would never doubt me without your whispers." "Enough." Cassion's word was a guillotine's fall. The alpha command in it vibrated in the stone beneath my knees. "Captain Kale, take Lady Seraphine to the North Tower. She is to be held in isolation, pending a full investigation of the throne's repair and all her activities for the past year." As Kale and two guards moved forward, Seraphine didn't struggle. She straightened her skirts, her mask slamming back into place, but her eyes were twin emeralds of pure, promised vengeance. They locked on me. "This isn't over, Sentinel," she hissed, the title a curse. "You have won a battle, but you have made a mortal enemy. I will see you broken, I will see everything you love burn, and I will stand over the ashes and laugh." They led her away. The throne room was silent, stunned. Cassion stepped down from the dais and offered me his hand. I took it and he pulled me gently to my feet. He didn't let go. He looked at our joined hands, then into my eyes. In his gaze, I saw the last of the poison's fog clearing, replaced by a gratitude so deep it was humbling, and a dawning, terrifying realization. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. The most dangerous ones were already inside, wearing the faces of family. And I, with my heart and my untamed power, had just declared war on them all. The shield had not just protected the king, it had unmasked a traitor, and in doing so, it had made the walls of the palace feel thinner and the shadows within them infinitely darker. Chapter 10. The web unwoven. The North Tower held its prisoner, but Seraphine's shadow clung to the palace like a stubborn frost. Her arrest sent shockwaves, not of vindication, but of deeper fear. The noble families whispered not of her guilt, but of the sentinel's power to turn the king against his own. Duke Oren left the capital in a fury, taking his household and his soldiers back to the north. The rift was now a chasm. Cashin worked day and night, a king trying to hold a cracking vase together. I trained with Isolde, the connection to the land growing stronger, more intuitive, but it was a quiet, internal power. It couldn't fight whispers, it couldn't mend political trust. Ilara was my solace. Her faith was absolute. "You saved Papa from the bad magic in the chair," she said one afternoon as we walked in the now barren winter gardens. Aunt Seraphine was always mean, her smiles never reached her eyes. The child saw what courtiers blinded by tradition refused to. A week after the arrest, Isolde found me at dawn training. Her face was graver than usual. "The king requests you in the map room. There has been a development." The map room was a cavernous space dominated by a vast, detailed table carved with the kingdom's mountains, forests, and rivers. Cashin stood over it, Kale at his side. They were staring at a section of the northern border where Duke Oren's lands met the wild, untamed stretches rumored to harbor the Shadow Fang. Cashin looked up as I entered. He looked older, the weight of the crown a visible burden. "Lyra, we've intercepted a messenger trying to cross into the northern passes." He nodded to Kale. The captain placed a small, sealed metal tube on the table. The man carried no weapons, only this. He fought to destroy it before we took him. He's in the dungeons, but he's conditioned. Like the attackers at the mask, his mind is a locked box. Cashin picked up the tube. The seal is Duke Oren's personal crest. He broke the wax and pulled out a single, small scroll. He read it, his face hardening into a mask of stone. Without a word, he handed it to me. The script was elegant, familiar. Seraphine's hand. "Uncle Oren, the situation has accelerated. The Sentinel's influence is complete. The king is lost to us. The plan must move forward. The wolf awaits your signal at the agreed location. Offer him the Eastern Veil as previously discussed. Once the king is removed, the child will need a regent. That role and the stability of the realm will naturally fall to the one who cleansed it of magical corruption. Be ready, your loyal niece S." The blood drained from my face. The wolf could only be the Shadow Fang commander. They weren't just hiring mercenaries, they were offering him land, a permanent foothold in the kingdom. And Seraphine, she wasn't just a traitor seeking power. She was orchestrating a coup, planning to install herself as regent over Ilara, with the Shadow Fang as her brutal enforcers. She was going to burn the kingdom to save her place in its ashes. "The Eastern Veil," Kale said, his voice tight. "It's rugged, defensible, borders the wildlands. If the Shadow Fang hold it, they could strike anywhere at any time. And Oren is with them," Cashin said, the betrayal a fresh wound. "My own uncle, he'd rather see the kingdom shattered than see an Omega Sentinel at my side." He looked at me, his eyes haunted. "This is my fault, my family's corruption, my father's sin. It has festered for a generation, and now it is killing my kingdom." "No," I said, the word firm. I placed my hand on the map over the carved mountains of the north. The cool, smooth wood steadied me. "This is their choice, their greed, their fear. You are trying to build something better. That is not a weakness. It is your greatest strength." He covered my hand with his touch warm and desperate. They are moving now, Lyra, because of you, because you exposed her. They feel cornered. A cornered snake is most dangerous. Then we don't corner them, I said, an idea forming, born of instinct. We unravel their web from the center. They both stared at me. How? Kale asked. The messenger, his mind is locked, a magical compulsion. I looked at Cashin. Let me try to open it. The dungeons were a world of damp stone and despair. The messenger sat in a bare cell, a young man with empty eyes humming a tuneless song. He showed no fear, no anger. He was a shell. The binding is strong, Isolde murmured, having joined us. Shadow fang magic, twisted and dark. To break it by force could shatter his mind. I won't use force, I whispered. I knelt before the young man, ignoring the cold seeping through my gown. I didn't touch his head. I reached for that part of my power that felt the roots of trees, the memories in stone. I sought the root of him, not the magic holding him, but the person underneath. I sent out a feeling, not a command, a memory of sunlight on grass. The taste of fresh bread, the sound of a mother's laugh, simple human things. He flinched, the humming stopped. I pushed deeper, past the oily cords of the binding spell. I found a name buried under layers of darkness. Ewan, I whispered it in my mind. His eyes flickered. A spark of confusion. I showed him another memory, not mine, but one I imagined. A proud moment, his father clapping him on the shoulder, a sense of accomplishment untainted. A tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Father, he rasped, his voice rusty from disuse. The oily cords in his mind recoiled from the light of his returning self. I didn't break them. I simply held the light steady, showing him the way back to who he was. With a gasp that was half sob, Ewan shuddered. The blankness vanished from his eyes, replaced by horror and disorientation. He looked around the cell, at the king, at me, and burst into tears. The lady, she said it was for the kingdom's purity. She said you were bewitched, he babbled. They have my sister, they said they'd kill her. Where? Cashin asked, his voice gentle but urgent. Where were you to meet the wolf, the ghost fen? Ewan choked out. Where the old sentinel watchtower fell, 3 days from the northern border, at the new moon. To finalize the treaty, the ghost fen, a treacherous, mist-shrouded swamp where the ruins of a sentinel outpost lay swallowed by bog and legend. It was the perfect place for a traitor and a mercenary to meet. Isolated, symbolic, we had the where, we had the when. We had the traitor's confession. Cashin's face set into lines of grim resolution. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the plan form. It was dangerous. It was a gamble that could end everything. We go to the ghost fen, he said, not with an army. That would warn them, a small group, fast, quiet. We intercept this meeting, we take the wolf, and we bring my uncle to face justice. And Seraphine, Kale asked. Cashin's expression was flint. She remains where she is for now. Her fate will be decided by the evidence we bring back. He turned to me. Lyra, the fen is a place of old magic, of earth and water. Your power, it may be our only advantage in such a place. He wasn't asking, he was stating a fact. Including me was no longer about protection. It was about strategy, about using the very thing everyone feared as our key to victory. The shield was going to war, not to stand in front but to walk beside. Into a haunted fen to face a traitor duke and a mercenary king, to cut the head from the serpent before it could strike. The web was unwoven, now we had to slay the spider. Chapter 11, The Ghost Fen. We rode at a punishing pace, a ghost of a company against the bleak winter landscape. Cashin, Kale, myself, and 6 of his most trusted guards, chosen for their silence and skill. We were shadows, leaving the palace under the cover of a starless night, our mission known only to Isolde and a handful of loyal souls left to guard Alara. The land changed as we moved north. The cultivated fields gave way to rolling, frost-bitten hills, then to dense, skeletal forests where the wind moaned through bare branches like a lament. The air grew damp and heavy, tasting of peat and decay. This was the borderland between kingdom and wild, a place of forgotten trails and older magics. On the morning of the third day, we reached the edge of the ghost fen. A wall of gray mist hung before us, so thick it swallowed sound. Gnarled black trees rose from the murky water like the bones of long-drowned giants. The silence was absolute, oppressive. The old sentinel tower is a mile in due north, Kale said, consulting a weathered map. The ground is a trap, solid earth one step, sucking bog the next. Cashin dismounted, his expression grim. We go on foot from here, tether the horses, stay close. We entered the mist and the world vanished. Sounds were muffled. Vision extended barely 10 feet. The ground was a spongy, treacherous mat of roots and moss over black water. Every step was a gamble. My new senses, so attuned to the solid, comforting stone of the palace, recoiled from this place. The fen felt sick, wounded, its natural magic twisted by a long-ago tragedy, the fall of the Sentinel Watchtower. I could feel the echoes of that fall. A deep psychic scar in the land, still weeping after generations. It made my head ache. We moved in utter silence, communicating with hand signals. The only sounds were the squelch of our boots, the occasional drip of water from a skeletal branch, and the frantic beating of my own heart. Then, voices, muffled by the fog but clear enough. We froze, melting into the shadow of a massive, half-sunken log. The veil is mine the moment the king falls. The voice was rough, gravelly, familiar from the square, the wolf. The king will fall, another voice answered, older, brimming with entitled fury. Duke Oren, my niece has seen to it. His mind is already clouded by the sentinel witch. His judgment is compromised, the council is fractured, the northern houses stand with me, you will have your foothold, I will have my throne. And the girl, the heir, the wolf asked, a cruel chuckle, a child needs a regent, Seraphine will see to her education. And if the child proves difficult, well, accidents happen in unstable times. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through my fear. They spoke of destroying Cashin, of using Alara with such casual, monstrous ease. Cashin's hand found my arm in the mist, a silent warning, a plea for control. I nodded, though my whole body trembled with the need to act. We crept closer, using the fog as our cloak. Through the gray veil I saw them. The wolf stood on a rare patch of solid ground, his scarred face stark. Duke Oren was beside him, wrapped in furs, looking like a king already. Around them stood a dozen shadow fang warriors. Between them on a stump lay a scroll, the treaty ceding the eastern veil. Sign it, Oren said, offering a quill, and the work begins. The wolf took the quill. This was the moment. If that scroll was signed, the alliance was sealed. Cashin raised his hand, the signal to move, but the fen had other plans. As he stepped forward, his boot came down on a patch of ground that looked solid but was merely a raft of rotten vegetation. It gave way with a sickening squelch. He stumbled, the noise echoing in the silent bog. Every head turned toward us. The wolf's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, found us in the mist. A slow, vicious smile spread across his face. Well, he drawled, dropping the quill, the rats have come to the snake's nest, and they brought the little witch with them. There was no more stealth. Chaos erupted. Kale and the guards surged forward, engaging the shadow fang. Steel rang against steel, a brutal, close-quarters dance in the cloying mist. Cashin fought his way toward Oren, his face a mask of betrayed fury. The wolf ignored them all. He walked straight toward me. The sentinel, he purred. I've wanted to meet you properly, to see what makes you so special. He wasn't like the others. His malice wasn't mindless. It was intelligent, curious, and hungry. He carried no obvious weapon. He didn't need one. I could feel the dark, oily magic coiled around him, a weapon in itself. He raised a hand. A wave of crushing pressure slammed into me, not physical, but mental. It was the same binding magic he used on his men, but magnified 100-fold. It sought to wrap around my will, to silence my power, to turn me into an empty vessel. I threw up my own defense, the silver-veined barrier I'd used in the square. It flared between us, but his magic was relentless, corrosive. It ate at the edges of my shield, dripping black tendrils of pure negation. Your magic is young, he taunted, stepping closer. Wild, mine is refined, forged in blood and sacrifice. You are a seedling trying to stand against a blight. My shield flickered. The pressure increased, a vice on my temples. I could hear Cashin shouting my name, but he was locked in combat with Orin. I was alone, despair threatened to swallow me. Then my foot slipped on the wet ground, and my hand, flung out for balance, plunged into the cold, black water of the fen. And I felt it, the deep, grieving pain of the land, the memory of the tower's fall. The slow poison of betrayal that had seeped into the water and soil. The fen wasn't just a place, it was a wound, and the wolf's magic, it was the same. A poison, a blight. I didn't fight his magic head-on, that was what he expected. Instead, I did what Isolde taught me. I listened. I let my consciousness sink into the water, into the grieving earth. Help me, I begged silently, not for strength but for understanding. Show me, and the fen answered. It showed me the tower, not as ruins but whole and proud, a sentinel standing atop it, a silver beacon in the wilderness. It showed me the betrayal, not from outside but from within, a trusted ally poisoning the well, weakening the stones. It showed me the fall, the crushing weight, the silence that followed. The memory wasn't just history, it was a pattern, the same pattern happening now, betrayal from within, poison in the foundation. The wolf's magic was the poison, and the fen remembered how to reject poison. I opened my eyes, the wolf was inches away, his smile triumphant. Goodbye, little sentinel. I pulled my hand from the water. It wasn't wet, it was coated in a shimmering, silver-blue light, the concentrated memory of the fen's pure, ancient water, the essence of its original, untainted self. I didn't throw a shield, I placed my glowing hand flat against the center of his chest, over his heart. The land remembers its protectors, I whispered. The effect was instantaneous. The silver-blue light spread from my hand over his body like cracking ice. Where it touched, his oily, dark magic didn't just retreat, it screamed. It hissed and boiled away, evaporating into foul-smelling smoke. It wasn't an attack on him, but a cleansing of the corruption he carried. The wolf staggered back, not in pain, but in utter, mind-breaking shock. He looked at his hands, at the fading light, his face a caricature of disbelief. His power, his refined, forged magic was gone, scrubbed clean by the memory of a purity he had spent a lifetime defiling. He didn't cry out. He just stood there, hollowed, a weapon suddenly disarmed. The sight was so shocking it briefly stilled the fighting around us. It was all the opening Cashin needed. He disarmed Orin with a furious twist of his sword, sending the Duke's blade flying into the bog. Kale and the guards subdued the stunned Shadow Fang. Cashin stood over his kneeling uncle, chest heaving, his sword point at the man's throat. His eyes, however, were on me and the broken wolf. The fen, I stammered, the silver light fading from my hand, leaving me trembling and spent. It showed me it's the same. The poison in the throne, the poison in him, it's all the same. Cashin understood. The conspiracy wasn't just political, it was magical. A corruption of the old ways, a blight spread by those who feared the return of true balance. And we had just cut off one of its strongest limbs. He looked from the shattered wolf to the defiant, beaten Duke. Bind them, he commanded, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the ghost fen. We return to the capital, the trial will not wait. We had come for a traitor and a mercenary. We had uncovered the root of a deeper sickness. And I had learned a terrible, wonderful truth. My power wasn't just a shield. In the right place, with the right understanding, it could be a cure. Even for a wound as old and festering as the ghost fen or a kingdom. Chapter 12, The Trial of Fire, the return to the capital, was a somber procession. Duke Orin, bound and sullen, and the wolf, whose real name we learned was Vorin, walked in a daze, his predatory confidence replaced by a hollow shell of a man. The kingdom held its breath. A duke of the realm, the king's own uncle, arrested for treason. The scandal threatened to tear the remaining loyalties apart. Cashin did not wait. He declared a public trial to be held in the great square where the people could witness justice. It was a bold, dangerous move. It showed transparency, but it also provided a stage for disaster. The day of the trial dawned cold and clear. A massive platform was erected before the palace steps. Cashin sat in a high chair of state, not the ornate throne, but a simple, severe seat of carved oak. I stood slightly behind and to his right, a place now expected, now hated. Isolde stood to his left, a silent, authoritative figure from a past they all wanted to forget. The square was packed, a sea of faces stretching to the distant buildings. Nobles in their finery occupied guarded sections, their expressions ranging from grim approval to outright hostility. But the majority were the common people of the city, their faces pale and anxious, their fate hanging in the balance. Oren and Voren were brought forth in chains. A murmur swept through the crowd. Cashin rose, his voice amplified by the quiet and his own alpha command carried to every corner. Duke Oren of the Northern Reach. You are charged with high treason, conspiracy to assassinate your king, and collusion with a foreign mercenary army to sow chaos in the realm. How do you plead? Oren drew himself up, his dignity a tattered cloak. I plead for the salvation of this kingdom. He boomed, playing to the crowd. I acted to free us from the insidious corruption that has bewitched the throne. The sentinel magic is a plague. It clouds the mind, destroys tradition, and invites the wrath of the old gods. Look at her. He pointed a shaking, dramatic finger at me. She stands where a queen should stand, an Omega, a witch. She has enchanted the king and now destroys his own family. I am no traitor. I am the last true defender of the realm. His words were fire on dry tinder. A rumble of agreement came from the noble sections. Doubt flickered in the eyes of some commoners. Seraphine's poison, spread through rumor, was doing its work. Cashin's face was stone. Your defense is slander and superstition. We have the signed treaty with the Shadow Fang. We have the testimony of your own messenger, freed from magical bondage. We have your words in the ghost fen, plotting the murder of a child. This is not about sentinel magic. This is about your greed for a crown you were never promised. Lies, Oren shrieked, his composure breaking. Fabrications born of witchcraft, let her prove her power is not evil. Let her submit to the trial of purity. Let the sacred flame judge her. A collective gasp tore through the square. The trial of purity was an ancient, barbaric rite outlawed for a century. The accused would hold their hand in a consecrated flame that burned only corruption. If pure, they would be unharmed. But the flame was unpredictable, often fueled by the prejudices of those who lit it. It was a tool of terror, not truth. A cruel smile touched Cashin's lips. The trial is abolished, uncle. We no longer burn people to prove a point. Because you fear what it will show, Oren spat. He turned wildly to the crowd. You see, he protects the witch, he fears the truth. If her magic is pure, let the holy fire bless her. If it is a corruption, as we all know it is, let it burn. The chant began in the noble section, then spread, fueled by fear and Oren's desperate charisma. Trial of fire, trial of fire, trial of fire. The situation was spiraling out of control. The crowd's mood was turning, a beast stirred by Oren's performance. If Cashin refused, he looked weak, controlled by me. If he agreed, he handed me to a mob's justice. I stepped forward. I didn't look at Cashin. I looked at the sea of faces, at the fear and hope and hatred there. I remembered the lower district, their courage. I remembered the warm rock, the grieving fen. My power was not a dirty secret. It was my truth. I will do it. My voice, quiet but clear, silenced the chanting. Cashin's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Lyra, no, it's a trap. The flame can be manipulated. I know, I said softly, meeting his terrified eyes. But if I don't, his lies become their truth. The kingdom fractures. This isn't about magic, Cashin. It's about trust. They need to see. His grip tightened, a silent plea. Then slowly, with infinite reluctance, he released me. The trust in his eyes was more terrifying than any flame. A brazier was brought forth, a massive iron bowl on legs. The high priestess, an ancient woman with eyes like milky quartz, approached. She poured oil and began a low chant. As she chanted, nobles from Oren's faction stepped forward, each adding a pinch of powder to the oil, herbs sacred to them, but I could feel their intent: suspicion, hatred, fear. They were poisoning the flame before it was lit. The priestess struck a spark. The oil ignited with a whoosh, flames leaping high, not orange, but a disturbing, veined blue-green. The crowd oohed. This was no pure flame. This was a judge already prejudiced. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of the wolf, oily magic of the fen's cleansing water. This flame was the same, a corruption pretending to be purity. The priestess gestured to me. "Place your hand in the flame, child. The sacred fire will see your soul." I walked to the brazier. The heat was immense, blistering my face. The blue-green flames danced, hungry. I could feel their malicious intent, a collective will to burn the witch. I closed my eyes. I didn't think of the fire. I thought of Alara's laugh, of Cashin's hand on mine in the corridor, of the people of the lower district fighting for their homes. I thought of my mother's journal, her love a final shield. I thought of the pure, silver-blue memory of the fen's water. I didn't raise a shield. I simply held the feeling of that purity in my heart. I let it fill me, a cool, silver light against the heat. I plunged my hand into the center of the blue-green fire. A scream went up from the crowd. Cashin surged to his feet, but there was no smell of burning flesh, no scream of pain from me. The flames changed. Where my hand entered, the malicious blue-green flickered, fought, and then melted away, transformed. From my fingertips bloomed a pure, brilliant silver flame, clean and bright. It spread from my hand, racing through the brazier, turning the entire fire from corrupted blue-green to dazzling, holy silver. The heat vanished, replaced by a gentle, warming glow. I held my hand in the silver fire, unharmed. I turned my palm upward, and the flame danced over my skin like a loving pet. The square was utterly, profoundly silent. I pulled my hand out. The silver flame in the brazier slowly faded back to normal orange, the corruption cleansed from it. My hand was unmarked, not even red. I turned to the crowd, to Duke Oren, whose face was a mask of utter, cataclysmic defeat. "My magic is not a weapon of corruption," I said, my voice ringing in the silence. "It is a magic of protection, of truth. It does not burn the innocent, it only burns the lies." I looked directly at Oren. "You tried to burn me with a flame of fear and hatred, but love is stronger than fear. Truth is stronger than lies, and a heart that seeks only to protect cannot be burned." The silence broke. Not with cheers at first, but with a wave of awe, a collective release of breath. Then a single voice from the commoners section shouted, "The Sentinel." Another joined, then another. The chant spread, no longer a demand for trial, but an acknowledgement. "Sentinel, Sentinel." Cashin walked to my side. He didn't address the crowd. He looked only at Oren, his voice final and cold. "The fire has judged Uncle, and it has found you wanting. The sentence for treason is death. Take him away." As Oren was dragged off, weeping now, his defiance gone, Cashin's hand found mine. He didn't care who saw. In the heart of the silver-cleansed fire, before his entire kingdom, the king held the sentinel's hand. The shield had not just endured the trial, it had transformed it. And in that transformation, a legend was born and a king's heart was laid bare for all to see. Chapter 13, The Crown's Shadow Victory was a cold bedfellow. Duke Oren was executed at dawn, a somber private affair. The Northern Alliance, leaderless and shamed by the public trial, sent envoys of cautious reconciliation. The immediate threat was broken. The palace, however, felt more like a tomb than a triumph. Seraphine, in her tower cell, was the silent, festering heart of the unease. She had said nothing since her arrest, refusing food, speaking only to demand her right to a trial by her peers. She was a dormant viper, and everyone knew it. Cashin spent long hours in the war room with Kale and his commanders, planning the systematic dismantling of the remaining Shadow Fang cells. But the darkness had seeped inward. The near loss at the trial, the constant threat to Alara, the weight of his uncle's betrayal, it wore on him. The strong, certain king I'd first seen was now a man haunted by the shadows in his own house. One evening, I found him alone on a high balcony, staring north where the lights of the city gave way to the dark of the wild lands. He didn't turn as I approached. "They're still out there, Lyra," he said, his voice quiet, tired. "Vorin was a weapon, not the hand that wielded it. Orin was a useful fool. Seraphine, she is clever, but this feels bigger. This corruption, this hatred for your bloodline, it has roots deeper than my father's fear. Someone taught him to fear, someone is still teaching others." I stood beside him, the winter wind biting through my shawl. "Isolde says the purge was too thorough, too organized to have been one king's paranoid whim. She believes there was a cabal, a group who saw the Sentinel Partnership as a threat to their own power. They whispered in your father's ear, they may be whispering still." He finally looked at me, his storm-gray eyes shadowed. "And they have my cousin as their perfect instrument. She has the blood, the access, the ambition." He rubbed his face. "I can't execute her without evidence of direct treason. The treaty and the poisoned mortar are damning, but she'll claim she was misled, that Orin acted alone. A public trial for her would be a circus, and she's masterful at circuses. But keeping her alive in my own palace," he trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging between us, "she will strike again. Then we find the evidence," I said firmly. "We find the cabal. How? They are ghosts they've hidden for a generation." An idea, reckless and desperate, formed in my mind. They are connected to Seraphine. A connection leaves a trail, not a paper trail, a magical one. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The binding magic on Vorin and his men, the poison in the throne mortar. They're the same foul energy, a signature. If Seraphine is their agent, she might carry a trace of it herself or have objects touched by it. I could feel for it." His grip on the balcony rail tightened. "You would have to get dangerously close to her. She's in a cell, surrounded by guards. What can she do?" "She is Seraphine," he said simply, as if that explained every possible danger. But he agreed, because we were out of options. The plan was made for the next day. I would visit Seraphine under the guise of delivering a royal decree on her living conditions. Kale and 2 guards would be just outside the cell door. Cashin would be watching from a hidden observation slit in the adjacent wall. The North Tower cell was cold, stone, and bare. Seraphine sat on a narrow cot, her back straight, her silver blonde hair perfectly arranged despite her captivity. She looked like a queen awaiting her coronation, not a prisoner. She didn't stand as I entered. Her green eyes swept over me, filled with a contempt so profound it was almost refreshing in its honesty. "The witch comes to gloat," she murmured, examining her perfect nails. "Or has my cousin sent you to finish what your trial of fire began?" I placed the rolled parchment on a small table. "Your conditions have been reviewed. You will be allowed 1 book per day from the library, unilluminated." She smiled, a thin, cruel curve of her lips. "How generous." "Tell me, does he still hold your hand when he thinks no one is looking? Does he whisper promises to his precious, pure-hearted sentinel?" I ignored her, closing my eyes slightly, reaching out with my senses. I pushed past the surface, her hatred, her vanity, her icy control. I sought the deeper stain, the residue of the dark magic she'd consorted with. At first there was nothing but the chilling emptiness of her ambition. Then I felt it, a faint, sickly thrum, not on her person but in the cell, in the stone itself. It was old, layered over with years, but it was the same signature. This tower, it hadn't just held prisoners. It had been a place where the dark magic had been used, where bindings were reinforced, perhaps where vows to the cabal were made. The thrum led me to a seemingly random stone in the far wall at floor level. I walked toward it, my pretense forgotten. "Looking for something, darling?" Seraphine's voice had lost its mocking edge. It was sharp, alert. I knelt, placing my hand on the cold stone. Beneath my palm, the thrum intensified. There was a hollow behind it, a very cleverly concealed hollow. Guard, Seraphine's shout was sudden, piercing. The sentinel is attempting to use her magic on me. The cell door burst open. Kale rushed in, his sword drawn. Miss Lyra, step away. It's not her, I said urgently, my fingers finding the almost invisible seam in the stone. It's in the wall, there's something here. In the confusion, Seraphine moved. It wasn't toward me or the door. She lunged for the cot, her hand darting beneath the thin mattress. She pulled out not a weapon, but a small, polished black stone, veined with red like frozen blood, a communication crystal, but unlike any I'd seen. He will know you're here, she hissed, her eyes glowing with fanatical triumph. He sees through it, he sees everything. She clutched the stone to her chest and whispered a single guttural word that tasted of ash and old blood. The stone in the wall exploded outward, not with fire but with a concussive wave of pure, silencing magic. A null wave, it hit me like a physical wall. My sentinel senses didn't just retreat, they were severed. The connection to the stone, to the earth, to my own power, it was gone, replaced by a deafening, empty silence inside my head. I cried out, clutching my skull, blind and crippled in a way I'd never imagined. Kale and the guards were unaffected. The magic was tailored, specific to my bloodline, a trap for a sentinel. Through the ringing silence, I saw Seraphine smile. Then she brought the black-red crystal down hard on the edge of the iron cot. It shattered. And in that shattering, a final, pulsing wave of energy shot out, not at me, but through the walls, through the very bones of the palace. An alarm, a beacon. From outside, far below, came the sounds of new chaos, shouts, the clash of steel, screams. Not an attack on the palace. The alarm hadn't summoned help for her. It had triggered an attack elsewhere. Kale grabbed me, hauling me to my feet as I stumbled, my power still deadened. The barracks, they're attacking the Royal Guard barracks. It was a diversion. A brutal, bloody diversion to pull the palace's defenses away from the tower. Seraphine stood calmly as Kale dragged me out. Her work was done. The trap had been sprung. She had lured the sentinel in, crippled her, and now her allies were creating the chaos she needed. As the cell door slammed shut, locking her in but also locking us out from whatever other secrets that hollow stone held, her final words followed me down the cold tower stairs, a promise in the sudden, screaming silence of my soul. The crown casts a shadow, sentinel. And in that shadow we are legion. We had come for evidence. We had sprung a trap that left me magically deaf and blind and had unleashed a wave of violence on the city. The cabal wasn't just a ghost, they were here, they had been here all along. And Seraphine was just one thorn on a vine that had strangled the kingdom for generations. The true enemy had just shown its face, and it was far closer and far more powerful than we had ever dreamed. Chapter 14, The Hollow Queen. My world was muffled. The vibrant connection to stone, air, and life that had become my second sight was gone, replaced by a flat, dead silence within. I felt hollowed out, clumsy. I moved through the frantic palace like a ghost, unable to sense the lie in a smile or the malice in a shadow. The attack on the barracks had been repelled, but at a cost, 20 guards dead, the Shadow Fang remnants melting back into the city like poison into a wound, and I was useless. Cashin was a storm contained, his concern for me warred with his fury at the breach. The stone in her cell, he growled in the war room, now filled with maps and reports. It was a listening post, a focus for their magic. They heard everything in that room for years. They knew about the trial. They knew we were coming. Isolde, her face pale, traced a finger over a map of the palace's ancient foundations. It's a web, not just in the tower. This null magic she used on Lyra, it's sophisticated. It requires anchors, points of power within the palace itself to create such a targeted effect. She looked at me, her eyes full of pity and dread. They didn't just infiltrate the court, they built their tools into the very walls of your home. The realization was a new kind of terror. Our sanctuary was riddled with magical termite mounds. We find them, Cashin said, his voice iron. We rip every stone out if we have to. That could take months, Kale warned, and with Lyra's senses compromised, we have no way to detect them. Then we use what we have, a new, quiet voice said. Ilara stood in the doorway, her small face serious beyond her years. She had been listening. If the bad magic is in the stones will remember who put it there. Right, Lyra, I wanted to weep. I can't hear them, sweetheart, not anymore. She walked over to me and took my hand. Her touch was warm, a tiny point of light in the internal void. But you taught me, the big rock in the garden, it remembers the sun, it remembers the rain, it doesn't need magic to remember, it just does. She looked at her father. We ask the stones who hurt them, we look for the memories that don't belong. A child's logic, breathtaking in its simplicity. The stones wouldn't speak to my deadened magic, but they held memories in their physical form, in tool marks, in mortar composition, in the wear of hands. Isolde's eyes lit up. The archives, the master builder's records. Every repair, every alteration to the palace structure for the last 100 years is documented. If we can find repairs that don't match the official logs or that were overseen by certain people, it was a needle in a mountain of hay, but it was a thread. We descended into the bowels of the palace, into the cavernous royal archives. Dust motes danced in the light of our lanterns. Mountains of scrolls and ledgers stretched into darkness, the written memory of the kingdom. We divided the work. Cashin and Kale took the military logs. Isolde took the records of the royal household. I, with my knowledge of the lower district's grimy reality, was paired with Master Thuron, the pinched archivist, to examine the building and repair ledgers. He was sour about it, but the king's command was absolute. Days blurred into nights. The silence in my head was a constant ache, but the work was a balm. We weren't hunting shadows, we were reading dry, meticulous notes about mortar mixes and timber deliveries. Then I found it, a log entry from 25 years ago. Reinforcement of foundation, northeast quadrant following minor settlement. Overseen Chamberlain Valerius. Stone-sourced Grey Peak Quarry, Master Mason Boren. It looked normal, but the date, it was the year after King Roland, Cashin's father, took the throne. The year the purge of the Sentinels began. I pulled the ledger for the Grey Peak Quarry. Its records showed no delivery of stone to the palace in that month, a discrepancy. Master Thuron, I said, my voice hoarse from dust. Who was Chamberlain Valerius? Thuron sniffed, consulting a genealogical index. Valerius served King Roland, died in a hunting accident a few years later. His line, his granddaughter married into the eastern duchies. The current Duchess Lenore, the sharp-faced, calculating woman from the council, Seraphine's ally. My heart began to pound, a dull thud in the quiet, and the mason, Boren, Thuron flipped pages. No record of a master mason Boren in the guild registries of that period. A ghost mason, a fake stone delivery, a repair overseen by the grandfather of a current hostile duchess. All at the time the purge began. I showed Cashin. His face grew cold, then furious. A foundation stone, laid as my father began his reign, laid as he began the massacre of your people. It's not just a listening post, it's a cornerstone of their corruption. We found more. A repaired section of the great hall wall, overseen by a now-dead uncle of Duke Orin. A relaid floor in the old treasury, supervised by an ancestor of another council member who had voted against me. Each was a small, innocuous repair, logged and forgotten. Each was a potential anchor for the Cabal's magic, woven into the palace over decades by different hands across generations. They weren't just a group, they were a legacy. A secret society of noble families who had been ensuring the Sentinel line never returned, and that their own power remained absolute since before Cashin's father was born. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Ilara, bored with ledgers, had been exploring a low, forgotten shelf of personal diaries donated by past servants. She tugged on my sleeve, holding a small, leather-bound book. "This one is sad," she said. "It's a maid. She talks about the nice lady with the stormy eyes who gave her a silver coin. The lady was always crying. Then the lady went away, and the maid had to help clean a room in the North Tower where the stones smelled bad. The lady with stormy eyes could only be my mother. The diary was from the year of the purge." The maid described being ordered by Chamberlain Valerius to scrub a small, newly repaired cell in the North Tower, removing reddish-black stains from the stones that smelled like old meat and fear. The cell, Seraphine's cell, the place of the null trap, it had been used before. Not as a prison, but as a chamber, a ritual chamber for binding, for blood magic, for the very spells that had shattered sentinel minds and hunted my mother. The evidence was a tapestry of horror woven over a lifetime. We had the who, the how, and the why. The cabal was real. Its members were the loyal nobles now sitting in his council, living in his city, smiling at his daughter. Cassian stood in the archive, surrounded by the proof of the rot at his kingdom's core. He didn't rage. He was preternaturally still. "They have been the shadow to my family's light for generations. They made my father their weapon. They tried to make me their puppet, and when I wouldn't break, they sent Seraphine to poison me and Orin to kill me." He turned to me, his eyes blazing with a clean, cold fire. "They took your family, they tried to take your power, they tried to take my child." He picked up the maid's diary, the evidence of my mother's suffering. "This ends now." The plan was not for battle, but for surgery. We would not assault their estates. We would use their own weapon, secrecy. Using the ledgers, we identified 7 key locations in the palace, the anchor stones for their magical web. At the same hour, under the guise of a structural survey ordered by the king, trusted teams of guards and Isolde's few remaining loyal sentinel descendants would simultaneously unseal each location, remove the corrupted stones, and replace them with clean ones blessed by Isolde's purifying rituals. We would cut the strings of their power in a single, coordinated stroke. The night of the operation, I stood with Cassian in the throne room before the now-cleansed foundation stone. My senses were still silent, but I didn't need them to feel the tension. This was the heart. If the cabal realized what was happening, if they had one last trap, a guard ran in, saluting. "All teams report success, Your Majesty. 6 anchors secured and replaced, no resistance encountered." 6. "And the 7th?" Cassian asked, his voice tight. The guard paled. "The 7th, the team found the stone already removed. The cavity was empty, and they found this pinned to the wall with a dagger." He handed Cassian a piece of fine vellum. On it, in Duchess Lenore's elegant script, was a single line. "You break the toys, but the children are already gone. The game has moved, little king. We await you in the light." They knew. They had always known we were looking. They had let us dismantle their old web because they no longer needed it. The null wave, the attack on the barracks, it was all misdirection. While we hunted stones, they had slipped away. The cabal had not been destroyed. They had simply relocated, and they had left a message not of defeat but of terrifying confidence. The hollow victory turned to ashes in our mouths. We had cleared the poison from our own veins, but the infection had already spread. The final battle would not be in the shadows of the palace, it would be in the open, and our enemies were no longer hiding, they were waiting. Chapter 15, The Sentinel's Crown. The silence in the war room was thicker than the stone walls. The cabal's mocking note lay on the table between us, a single sheet of vellum that felt heavier than the crown itself. "We await you in the light." They weren't hiding, they were daring him to come. "They've retreated to Lenore's lands in the east," Kale said, pointing to the map. "The Vale of Arden, it's fortified, fertile, and surrounded by loyal houses who have profited from her rule for decades. She's declared it a free province, separate from the corrupted crown. And she'll have the Shadow Fang remnants with her," Isolde added grimly. "And any noble too afraid or too greedy to stay with a king who sides with sentinels and commoners, it's a secession. A civil war." Cassian stared at the map, his jaw a hard line. They want a war, they think I am weakened, distracted, they think the kingdom is divided. He looked up, his gaze finding mine. The hollow silence in my head was a void where my power should have been, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. His eyes held no blame, only a fierce, protective resolve. They are wrong. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Cashin didn't just call his banners, he did something unprecedented. He called a gathering not just of nobles, but of representatives from every town, every guild, every district in the capital. He stood before them in the rebuilt great square, not on a high dais, but on a simple platform among them. "They tell you I am bewitched," he called out, his voice carrying over the sea of faces. "They tell you the magic that saved this city, that saved my daughter, is a curse. They tell you to fear the woman who stood between you and fire, between your children and poison. They offer you a return to the old ways, where your worth was measured by your blood and your place was decided by your birth." He paused, letting the words sink into the cold air. "I offer you something else. I offer you a kingdom where a guard's son can become a captain on his merit, where a merchant's daughter can learn to read in a royal library, where an orphan from the lower district can become the shield that protects us all." He gestured to me, standing at the edge of the platform. "They call that dangerous, I call it just, I call it right." He wasn't just rallying an army. He was founding a new idea of a kingdom, and the people, who had seen their homes defended and justice done in the fire's light, roared their approval. The army that marched east a week later was not just the king's guard. It was cobblers and farmers, weavers and miners marching alongside knights. They marched for the future he had promised. I rode at Cashin's side, a place now earned and unquestioned, even if I felt like a fraud. My magic was still a locked room inside me. I was a symbol without my power, a shield made of glass. The Vale of Arden appeared as a green jewel nestled between sharp, gray mountains, and surrounding it like a bristling metal crown was Duchess Leonore's army. It was smaller than ours, but it held the high ground, fortifying the only pass into the valley. They had prepared for a siege. Cashin's army camped on the windy plains below. The two forces stared at each other across a mile of no man's land, tension crackling in the thin mountain air. That night in the command tent, Cashin made his decision. "We cannot siege. Winter is coming. Our people are not soldiers. They cannot sit in the cold for months. And every day we wait, Leonore's poison spreads. We must break them tomorrow, a direct assault." It was a brutal, bloody calculus. Attacking uphill into fortified positions would be a slaughter, even with greater numbers. "There might be another way," I whispered. All eyes turned to me. I pointed to the map, to the mountains flanking the pass. The sentinel outpost in the Ghost Fen, it was one of a network. Isolde said they were built on ley lines, points of power. There should be a sister outpost here. I placed my finger on the eastern mountain overlooking the vale. If it still stands, it would be behind their lines, a way in. Isolde's eyes widened. "The Sun Peak Watch. It was abandoned after the purge. If the path still exists, it would be treacherous. But if a small group could reach it, they could open the gates from within, create a diversion." "A suicide mission," Kale said bluntly. "Through unmarked mountains into a ruin that might not exist, then into the heart of the enemy camp." "I'll go," I said. The words were out before I could think. I can't fight on the field, my power is gone, but I can find the path. The stones, even if I can't hear them, I can read them. The old sentinels built with the land, the path will be there. Cashin's face was pale. "No, absolutely not. I will not send you into that." "You're not sending me," I said, meeting his gaze. "I am asking to do my duty, to be the shield, not by standing in front of you, but by opening the way. Let me do this for Alara, for the kingdom you're building." The argument in his eyes was a storm, fear, love, pride, terror. Finally, he closed his eyes and gave one sharp nod. The climb was a nightmare of scree slopes, sheer cliffs, and biting wind. Kale and 10 of his best men came with me. Isolde guiding us with her fading memories of the old maps. I led not by magic but by instinct, seeing where the rock was weathered into steps, where a natural arch framed the path, where the mountain itself seemed to offer a handhold. It was the ghost of my power, a memory in my bones. We found the Sun Peak watch as dawn broke, not a tower but a series of clever platforms and tunnels carved into the mountain peak, camouflaged to be invisible from below. It was cold, empty, haunted by wind, but it was intact. And from its highest ledge we looked down directly into the Vale of Arden, onto the backs of Lenore's fortifications. The plan was simple. At noon, when Cassion's army began its faint attack on the main pass, we would descend the hidden cliff path, open the small, forgotten postern gate Isolde swore was there, and let in a strike force to take the walls from behind. We waited, shivering in the ruins. I watched the tiny shapes of Cassion's army form up on the plain below. My heart was a drum against my ribs. This was it, everything led here. Then I felt it, not a sound, a tremor, a deep, wrong vibration through the stone of the mountain itself. It came from directly below us, from within the vale. I ran to the ledge and looked down. In the center of Lenore's camp, in a cleared circle, they had erected not a command tent, but a structure of black stone and obsidian mirrors. And around it, figures in dark robes chanted. In the center stood Duchess Lenore, and beside her, held by two guards, was Seraphine. They weren't just defending, they were performing a ritual, drawing on the same corrupted magic, magnified by the place of power the sentinel outpost had once guarded. They weren't waiting to be attacked, they were planning to unleash something. The gate, I shouted to Kale. We have to stop that ritual now. The descent was a controlled fall. We half climbed, half slid down the hidden path, emerging in a forgotten quarry behind the enemy lines. The postern gate was there, rusted but intact. As Kale's men worked to force it, the unnatural tremor grew stronger. The air grew thick, tasting of metal and rot. The gate groaned open. We spilled into a deserted alley of the camp just as a wave of sickly, green-black energy erupted from the ritual circle, visible even in the daylight. It didn't attack the army. It shot upward, then arced, streaming toward the mountain pass, toward Cassion's advancing forces. A wave of magical despair, meant to break their will before a sword was ever raised. I saw him then, a tiny figure of gold and blue at the front of his army, raising his sword. He was riding straight into the wave. No, the scream tore from me. And with it, something broke. The silence in my head didn't shatter, it melted, not with a return of the gentle connection to the earth, but with a torrent. The pain of the mountain, the grief of the abandoned watch, the righteous fury of the people below, the pure, desperate love in my own heart, it all crashed together, a dam bursting. The pendant at my neck didn't grow warm. It turned to white fire, I didn't think. I raised my hands toward the streaming wave of corruption. I didn't form a shield. I gave the torrent inside me a single direction, a single purpose, protect HIM. A pillar of pure, silver light erupted from me. It didn't block the green-black wave, it consumed it. The two energies met in the sky above the battlefield with a soundless concussion that made the earth shake. The corruption disintegrated, unmade by a light that was the memory of sun on stone, of a mother's love, of a king's promise, of a people's hope. The light didn't stop. It shot forward, a lance of pure sentinel power, and struck the black ritual structure in the center of the vale. There was no explosion. The black stones and obsidian mirrors simply turned to sand and trickled away. The chanting figures were thrown back, unharmed but magically shattered. Lenore stared, her face a mask of utter, devastated disbelief. Seraphine sank to her knees, the last of her borrowed power extinguished. On the field, Cassion's army, their will unbroken, gave a roar that shook the mountains and charged. The battle was over before it truly began. The heart of the rebellion had been cut out by a light they could not comprehend. I collapsed, the torrent gone, leaving me empty and trembling. Kale caught me. The last thing I saw before my vision grayed was Cassion, turning his charger from the broken pass, his eyes searching the mountain, finding me before he led the final, victorious charge into the vale. I awoke in a tent to the sound of quiet victory. Cashin sat by my cot, still in his battle-stained armor, his head in his hands. He looked up when I stirred. His eyes were red-rimmed, full of a fear I had never seen in them before. "You were gone," he whispered, his voice raw. "The light, it was you." And then it vanished, and I thought he couldn't finish. "I'm here," I said, my own voice a thread. He reached out, his armored hand covering mine. "You saved us again, not with a shield, with a sword of light." I finally understood, I murmured, exhausted but peaceful. The power wasn't in the stone or the water, it was in the choice to protect. The love is the power. He was silent for a long time, just holding my hand. Then he spoke, his voice firm, clear, a king's voice making a proclamation. "A kingdom needs a shield, but it also needs a heart. It needs both its pillars to stand true." He took a deep breath. "Lyra of the Sentinel line, who has saved her king, her princess, and her people, not with birthright but with boundless courage and a pure heart, will you stand with me, not just as my sentinel, but as my queen?" The world stopped. The tent, the sounds of the camp, the weight of everything, it all faded. There was only his face, earnest and fierce, offering me not a crown of gold but a crown of partnership, of complete and equal trust. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I was the invisible girl from the alley, the Omega with no name, and he was offering me everything. I didn't have the words, so I gave him the only answer that mattered. I squeezed his hand and nodded. His smile then was the dawn after a long, dark night. It was the promise of the kingdom we would build together. The war was over. The cabal was broken, its leaders captured. The shadows had been burned away by a light they could never understand. And from the ashes of the old, cruel world, a new one was being born. With a king who saw his people's worth and a queen who had learned that her greatest power had been in her heart all along. The sentinel had found her purpose, the orphan had found her family, and the invisible girl would help lead a kingdom into the light forever.